I also wanted to just, what I was talking about, I wanted to bring up this topic that sort of arose during the meditation, which is, at one point I said something like, notice if you're resisting anything or kind of at odds with anything. And it kind of relates to your question in the beginning, right? It's like, one of the classic metta phrases, if you ever do the metta practice, we don't use it as much now, but if you read in the suttas, one of them is, "May I be free from enmity." Am I saying it right? Enmity. And enmity means to make an enemy out of something, to relate to something like it's an enemy. And I actually think that's a very important question and a very important dynamic to look at, of how we make enemies out of, not just others, which are also very important to look at, but I think actually even making enemies out of others starts with, it's just a practice where you're making enemies, like that's just how we relate. It's like, well, I don't like this and that, that's bad and wrong, and that's bad and wrong, and these are the things that are bad and wrong about me, and this experience, this feeling in my chest, this thought, that thought, like I was upset, like this way we have of often like defining ourselves by what we don't like. Like, I know who I am by what I hate. Including about myself, first and foremost about myself. I was actually watching myself recently, and I kind of had this I was realizing, I do a lot of criticizing. Like I'll talk about, oh, this is fucked up and that's fucked up, and it's in very I like to think it's in very articulate, intelligent, kind of well-formed statements. But I was looking at that, I was like, it's still kind of just complaining though, isn't it? Like, it's a very sophisticated form of complaining, but it's just complaining, kind of. And I was talking to some other teachers about this, and I was really starting to just investigate how, there's actually different brain centers for this, but there's the kind of what we call, a lot of our education comes from this, is like what we call critical thinking. And there's a whole physiology that's part of this, is the orientation that basically takes things apart. And it breaks things down, and it like criticizes them. I don't mean like thinks critically, right? And it definitely has its place. I'm not saying it's all bad and wrong. I think I'm kind of complaining about this now, aren't I? But we want to really exercise this other side of us too, which is the other part of us that actually puts things together. That instead of taking apart, actually puts things together. It actually sees the commonality. Right? Critical thinking is about kind of discerning the difference. And this other part is about actually seeing the commonality. And when we meditate, how they're doing all this like brain studies on meditators. And I remember the abbot of the monastery where I was, he said, we could have told them this thousands of years ago. But the meditation's about cultivating that unifying part of the brain, right? Ultimately, which then allows you to eventually, cultivate it enough where you really do have the perception that everything is one. You see the interdependence between everything. What we crave so deeply and long for so deeply, things like love and things like peace and well-being, those exist in that unifying orientation. you can't criticize your way to happiness. By definition. You see what I mean? Because even if you're like, no, I'm going to keep problem solving, it's like, I know, but you're never going to get to a point where you're like, aha, there it is. That's the last problem. Furthermore, like, you're actually getting better and better at finding problems. Like, that's actually what you're practicing. And so there's no end to it, right? Even in a very ideal kind of setting, your brain's still like, oh, but that one little thing and that. On the other side, we have things like forgiveness, acceptance, embracing, allowing. This is where kindness lives. This is where tolerance lives. This is where empathy lives. And we develop that by practicing it. We develop that right now. Like, I was talking to someone earlier, and he was being very critical of himself that he didn't have enough acceptance. He was like, I just fucking don't have any empathy, and what's wrong with me? And it was deep, because I was like, dude, he's like, no, I really got to work this out. And I was like, man, you could start right now. Like right now. And it was interesting, because his whole thing was like, he actually wanted to work with me because he wanted to get over all these issues so he could become more loving. And I said, well, why don't we just start now? Like, can you just love this now? And it was really deep to see how the critical mechanism was just, it was going and going and going. And even something like Buddhism and empathy and love and accept, all these beautiful things, were still being fed through that critical machine, right? I find actually some of the most brutal self-criticism is spiritual self-criticism. Like, if you get on this path, and I find this path, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, I mean, tell me if your experience is different, it kind of has this arc where you start, and you got beginner's mind. In the beginning, it's awesome. It's just so good. You have no expectations. It's all like, it's kind of a fluke. You even showed up. Your friend told you to come. And you meditated, and the holy shit kind of felt like you were on acid. And and it was great. And like, holy shit, oh, I love this. This is good. And for a while, it's super sweet. Some of you may be there now. You might want to just plug up your ears for this next Then comes this like really brutal middle phase that lasts a really long time. Where now it's like an occupational hazard, because now you've got this identity. You're like a Buddhist, and you're like this spiritual person, and you got to be really nice and unattached and all these things. But then like it's not really working, and then all the things that you hate about yourself are still there, and you thought they were getting better for a while, but like they're back. And so you're gonna try harder, you're gonna practice harder. And then you do that for a while. And then there's this beautiful phase where you give up. You're like, wow, I'm fucked. Like, no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, it never really works in the end. And fuck this. But you keep practicing, you keep showing up. And then you're actually ready for this beautiful thing to just be with yourself as you are. To just like, oh, this is me, this is who I've always been, except I had all these ideas that I was doing it all wrong, and I was going to change all of it through my rigorous Buddhist practice. But I was actually kind of being a dick. I was actually, like I was just attacking myself with this new, like, this kind of like 2.0 criticism. And that's just a very painful phase. And if I can shorten that for any of you, I would be very happy about that. Because you don't need it really. I mean, you actually, this is what's weird, you do need it. You actually do kind of need to fail in a way. But you can also just start loving yourself right now. Like I mean right now. Not like once you fix whatever you were going to fix, but right now. And that's just about accepting that, hey, this is how it is. This is how you are. This is how all of us are. And it's okay. And actually in doing that, you're activating this other part of the brain. You're activating this unifying part of consciousness rather than the critical one. And the critical one is so powerful that it will actually fight this. Like I can hear half of your brains fighting this right now. Where it goes, no, but I gotta, no. And it's like, because it's just gotta keep saying no. It just wants to keep saying no because that's how it asserts itself. That's how the ego structure asserts itself. It asserts itself and kind of exists through conflict. Like if there's no conflict, there's no narrative. You see what I mean? And so even, it's like, well, you know, you can go, well, okay, I get it. It's about acceptance. And they'll criticize, like, well, how well are you you're not accepting as well as you could be. Right? So it's like, great, I get to criticize again. The practice of acceptance, this practice that actually unifies, that forgives, that's a really powerful practice. It's altering your brain chemistry on a very deep level. It literally shifts if you know about the nervous system, it's what takes you from the sympathetic to parasympathetic, or the activation to deactivation. If you've ever experienced peace, even briefly, you may have noticed that during those times, it's not that finally everything was to your liking. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not like, there, I just got everything I wanted. It's perfect, now I feel at peace. It doesn't really work like that. If you notice in those moments, everything is still kind of how it is, but somehow you're just more okay with it. You know, have you noticed that? It's not that, like, you know how our moods change pretty radically, but like circumstances don't necessarily change that radically? It's a really beautiful practice that's very good for you, actually. And it's good for everybody around you. And I feel 100% confident saying that our world wouldn't be in some of the dire places that it is if more people were practicing that. Because in the end, all these external expressions all come from the inside. It's all a manifestation of how people feel ultimately inside. And there's so much animosity inside that, of course, that begets all this animosity on the outside. What I also find is that it's also, that critical thing is a kind of defense. It's a way to defend oneself against, in a way it's like against heartbreak, really. Because I find that the more I let myself love directly and embrace and just allow, the more vulnerable it is. You know? Because you actually then, you start loving people and things, and you start to care, and you have empathy. But it actually then opens us up to loss. Right? Like if I actually care about, whoever or whatever, I can lose that as well. So there's a vulnerability in there. And this is where the compassion becomes so important, because if we don't have compassion for that vulnerability, then the other response is to harden. And Buddhism can be a great way to harden, actually. It's a misunderstanding, a very profound one. But this practice can be very easily co-opted and used as a way to harden. And be like, well, I'm unattached, and whatever, everything's everything, and and that's not the intention. That's not the way the Buddha meant it. There's actually a beautiful sutta. Let's say this briefly. If you end up studying the suttas, in the story, the Buddha actually had his two chief disciples. They called them like the right and the left hand of the Buddha. And it was Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. There's two characters in the story, and they're great. They're like they also give teachings, and you can read their suttas, and I love their whole story. But they both die. They both die before the Buddha, and after they first one dies, then the other one, and then. And it's very poetic. The Buddha says, in this one sutta, he says, it's like the sun and the moon have set on the Dharma. And what I always found very moving about that is when you read it, you can feel and hear that he's sad. That he's grieving. He's sad that these two very close friends have died. And I was struck that he didn't say, oh, well, whatever, I wasn't attached anyways. Oh, are they dead? Oh, well, So it's not, so that's not what it's about. This isn't actually a practice for, transcending your humanity. It's about, in many ways, I would say it's actually about embracing it on such a deep level that you then have profound wisdom about it. That by understanding our humanity deeply, we can act and live in accordance with it. Because what we mostly have is a humanity that's misunderstood and rejected, and is sort of all tied up in knots, in a sense. And so then the way we act and the way we interact and just how we take care of ourselves or others, it's often very misguided. And in that misguidance is a kind of rejection of our humanity. So by seeing our humanity, experiencing it, and embracing it, we, as when they say when the Buddha was enlightened, he saw reality as it really was. So we can see ourselves the way we really are. Not how we think we should be, not how someone told us we should be, but actually exactly who we are right here, right now. Not someday, not a long time ago, but right here, right now. This is it, right here. And we can allow that vulnerability and allow this deep heartness. I guess heartfulness would be the word, wouldn't it be? And just at any moment, it's just, it's like, it's just this leaning in towards kindness. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's just, at any given moment, you can just say, hey, what would be kind right now? Whether it's towards yourself, someone else, it doesn't have to be some grandiose thing. It's just, what would be kind? I remember seeing a quote from the Dalai Lama where he actually says something like, he says, my religion is kindness. Someone I think was asking about Buddhism and all that. He's like, really, my religion is just kindness. Because within kindness, it's all in there. You have all of it. You see what I mean? Because if you can be kind, then you don't see, by definition, you don't see yourself as being totally separate. Right? If you have kindness, then you by definition have a kind of presence in the here and now. You have compassion, and you have non-harming, which is, one of the pillars of this practice. And it's not complicated. It doesn't take some huge thing. It's just right now. What would be kind? From the smallest thing to the biggest. And it's no accident. I think pretty much every religion, every school, every spiritual teaching since the dawn of time lands on this. I can't think of one that doesn't. I think, doesn't Aldous Huxley have a thing where at the end of his life he says something like, it's kind of embarrassing, if anybody knows the actual quote, he says it's sort of like embarrassing after all this stuff I've done, after all this exploration, I don't have much more to say than just try to be kind to each other, or something like that. Might be getting it confused with Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. For all of you who are in your 40s. But that was be excellent to each other, right?